All right, good morning. We are here. Oh, Randy, could you maybe?
Yeah.
There's some kind of feedback happening. It's too loud or something. Sorry, guys. We are here at Unity of Springfield. It is Sunday, June 18th. I had to think really hard about that. It is Father's Day today. We are continuing our conversation on trusting the process of change. And this is Lessons from Finding Yourself in Transition by Robert Burnett. And we're on part 3 of a 4-part series. So we will go ahead and begin this morning with an opening prayer. So if you want to get comfortable, close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. And we will say, Mother, Father God, Spirit, Divine Oneness, we say thank you for this journey we call life and for the many blessings we have received along the way. We thank you for revealing the truth about ourselves when we are ready to accept and express it. We are thankful for the times of darkness and the times of breaking free. No matter where we are on the path, we know that you are with us and within us. And so it is. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So a reminder for those, if you haven't been with us or if you have, and just I'm putting it up every time. So this is what the book looks like. Again, there's a reprinting, and so there's 2 different covers if you're looking for Robert Burnett's work on finding yourself in transition. So we have talked about just the process of change in general. Then last week we talked about the stage of ending, which is that letting go of the old before we're able to embrace the new. And this week we are focusing in on the void. And so that is when we shed the husk of our old identity or the false sense that we've become conditioned to believe is me. And so Robert Burnett says that when we're focused in on that ending stage, it often brings up a lot of feelings like fear, anger, and confusion, maybe guilt or remorse as well. And that endings often feel very tumultuous, and he likens them to an earthquake. So that's the rumbling, you feel it shaking, everything feels like it's starting to come apart. And he says, so then the void, by contrast, is empty, flat, void of anything that seems solid. The void is more like a desert, being lost in the desert, or adrift on an endless sea. So he says this is where time and space seems to lose all form of reality, and we might find ourselves saying things like, this doesn't feel real. I need to snap out of it. Or I gotta pull myself together, like we're trying to cling because it's feeling so void of anything solid. Those are the things that we in our humanness start to say, which really for me, that gave a different meaning to I'm trying to pull myself together, thinking about it is that feeling of like being adrift on the sea or being lost in the desert. You're like, no, I gotta pull something solid together around me. But we probably have said that a million times without really thinking, like, what is it that I'm desiring when I say I got to pull myself together, I got to snap out of
it. Wouldn't it be better to let go instead? I mean, we're always trying to put ourselves in that, so we're comfortable, so it's like it used to be, instead of letting go and yes. Seeing what we're supposed to, what's next.
Yes, it's just that's in that moment, yes, that desire, we're trying in our humanness to do those things, yeah. So he says, in the void, Without our familiar forms and structure, our life might start to feel barren and empty. And we are challenged to draw upon our deepest resources during those times of transition. So it's that time when we're shedding the husk of our old identity, which is the false sense of self that we've been conditioned to believe is me. And we start to become really clear about who we really are. And I think, it's those moments where like everything's stripped away, and then you have to figure out what really is important or what does actually feel right. And we talked some in our previous times about those things that become routine and we don't even recognize how ingrained certain things have become in our day-to-day. And then looking at those things, and are they really what's important? Are they really, fostering that sense of who we truly are? Are they really giving us the connection to higher self, or have we just become used to the routine and it feels comfortable, so we just keep going and doing that? And so he says, it can be a wonderful opportunity to view our life and ourself from a new perspective. We might see things that were previously hidden from view. It's a death of the old mortal self and a rebirth into the eternal self.
When the screen your screen that had the desert on it, I don't know why, but I went right to Jesus in the desert. And kind of what you're saying is what he went through. And, when he had to, give up the whole world to find, it wasn't worth it as long as he could see, God, his Father.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just made that connection, and it was like,
okay. So Brahma in the book, he also talks about, this seeing things that were previously hidden from view. He talks about the void, that it's, at one point he made the connection of the void as like the winter. If you're in the talking about seasons and the natural progression, that the void is kind of like the winter, where the leaves are gone from the trees. There's less life scurrying around. But when you're in the winter and he actually made the connection, I think, on a winter hike or something, and he said it was really interesting to think about everything being stripped down, and that it feels like there's not as much life in the forest and things in the wintertime because everything has gone into hibernation, and things aren't growing and green and lush. But then there's the knowing that all that energy is just right there waiting to emerge with spring. And so, he said if we're using this analogy of seasons of life or processing through seasons, then a void is like a winter for us, where everything gets stripped down and we have to look for what is the energy that is waiting to emerge as soon as we're ready for it.
Oh, that it were easy to come to that when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess.
And so,
I guess it is. We just don't do it.
Yeah.
We eventually get there.
We do eventually get there. Yeah, it takes some pain though before we.
It seems like eventually.
Yeah. And so he had this poem from a Chinese poet and philosopher, Wu Mingfu, and it says, "The seed that is to grow must lose itself as seed, and they that creep may graduate through chrysalis to wing. Will thou then, O mortal, cling to husks which falsely seem to you the self?"
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I thought that was really nice as well. So he talks about in many Eastern philosophies that the void is seen as the underlying reality behind the universe. So in Buddhism, They talk about the term sacred emptiness, which is describing a state of knowing one's true nature. Taoist teachings discuss emptying oneself in order to experience the Tao or ultimate reality. So this idea of this void, this nothingness, is prevalent throughout many different types of teachings. He also talks about this concept through other mystics as well. So Meister Eckhart, who was a 13th century German mystic, wrote, "God is not found in the soul by adding anything, but by a process of subtraction." And, he just says that this is this idea that in order to become who we are, we have to let go of who we are not. And in letting go of who we are not, we enter into an experience of nothingness or non-being, and then allowing ourselves to have that experience of non-being, we can become more fully our true being. That was a lot. And that the void is our passageway to becoming truly alive and fully awake. And so, again, it's that, the nothingness, nothingness and non-being, it's really that unattachment to this physical world, and that reminder that in the nothingness and the non-being, that we are a spiritual and divine being, and that is the true self, the true connection, and all of this other stuff is just pretty stuff that we create as humans on this plane to move through this human experience.
It's like kind of like the whole thing with Michelangelo and creating the David, and someone asked him, and he said he just took away all of the things that were not the statue, and there he was there all the time.
Yeah, and I've heard that I've heard other sculptors and artists talk about that as well, that especially in sculpting, that they take away the material that is not the item, and that they feel it is living within the whole time, and they're just letting it out. They're just finding that within. Sorry, I've had this cough all week, and it gets me when I start talking. So Burnett returns us to the Exodus story. So last week, when we left off with our Exodus story, the Israelites had been fleeing the Pharaoh, and Moses used his staff to part the sea so that they could safely escape from the Pharaoh. And so as the story goes, the Pharaoh and his army followed after them, but as soon as the Israelites were safe on the other side, the sea returned to itself and they were all drowned, right? And so after celebrating their survival and that their slavery had ended, reality started to set in for the Israelites. And they began to realize that they were in a desert and they did not have food or water with them. And they had no idea where they were going, and they didn't have any weapons. If anybody else tried to attack them, they had no weapons to defend themselves. And they started to realize that they had lived so many years under the rule of the Egyptians that they didn't know the first thing about how to be a nomadic tribe in the desert. And, Moses was the only one that had had any experience surviving in the wilderness from his own path. And he says, but he also had an invaluable resource, and that was his direct access to God. So he was speaking to God, and so he became kind of, he was the most important. They needed Moses. If Moses wasn't there, they were kind of lost, because he was their direct link to God at that time. And he says, so if we relate this once again to our own story and our own wilderness experience, that in the ending stage we're preoccupied with the past. And so the ending, that's where we're preoccupied with, there's Egyptians chasing us, right? Here they come, they're right on top of us, and or we're still thinking about telling that story of how that happened. And he says, but eventually those Egyptians drown, and we fully accept the experience of the ending, and the past is no longer our primary focus. So we go, oh, okay, the Egyptians are gone. I don't have to worry about that anymore. Thank goodness, because that's all I wanted a minute ago. And then he says, but this is the good news, bad news, right? It's good that we're ready for the next step in the transition process, but the bad news is the next step is often a tough one. And so then we find ourselves in this in-between part where we have to step into the void, step into the wilderness, because that's the passageway to get to the other side. And he said, but we might feel the same as the children of Israel in the story, that we might feel lost. We might feel really vulnerable. We start maybe glamorizing. Remember how in last week they were like, man, you should have just let us stay slaves. We knew what that was about. We knew the structure of that. And now you've let us out here and we're wandering around. And maybe it would have just been better to stay there, because we might die out here, and that would be worse. And so he says the same thing, we may start to glamorize past behaviors or past situations. But if he says the Moses within, which is the I am, so for him in the Exodus story, Moses represents the I am, that connection within all of us that has direct access to spirit. That if we remember that we always have that with us, then we can step into the wilderness and know that we're going to get to the other side. And so in the story, it continues to happen that the Israelites face crisis after crisis. There's not food, there's not shelter, there's all the things that are happening. And each time they begin to panic, they go to Moses. And, oh, Moses, what are we going to do? Moses talks to God, and each time God intervenes and provides them with exactly what they needed in the moment. And some of these things happen in really unusual ways that couldn't be explained in any other way except that it was through the connection with spirit. One of those things being there's never enough food in the desert, and there's the whole story of the manna from heaven and how it appears each morning with the morning dew, and there's just enough for that day. If you try to save today's manna for tomorrow, it doesn't work.
It turns to worms.
Yes, it spoils, and you can't save it. It's only been given, except for the Sabbath, the day before the Sabbath, there is twice as much, and they can save just an amount to get them through the Sabbath and the next day. So all of these things happen that are really, really strange, and like I said, not explainable in any other way except that Spirit has their back, and Spirit is guiding them, and Spirit wants them to be successful. But in the void, when our normal rules have vanished, well, he says in the void, when the normal rules have vanished, that inner voice is all we need to guide us. But we are here in our humanness, right?
We are.
And so the next part of the story goes.
Amy, can I?
Yeah.
before we move, I worked at a prison for 25 years, and now I work part-time at a halfway house, a federal halfway house. And listening to that, it was such a good reminder for me, because we have so many of these people, they have spent, some of them 15 years, even 10 years in today's society. Things change so much in prison, and then they get out, and it is just like that, Lord. I can't tell you how many of them I hear go, man, I may as well just go back in, and I forget how terrifying that must be for them to have been in that for so many years, and then come back and things have changed so much, and they have no idea what to do with it. Some of them come out and their families, they don't have their families, they don't have their support system. Some of the people that were their support system before they went in, or the people that got them in the place where they were in anyway, and so they'll go back to them, because at least it's somebody there that's going to have their back, and it's going to take, so that's a good reminder.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, and it's some of the simple things, like I remember Lisa talking about one of the guys that had been in for 20, 25 years, and he was like, how am I going to put gas in my car?
Right.
And she's like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I see you got to pay at the pump now. And, so she's like, well, you can still pay with cash. People still take cash, but yes, you may want to learn how to do that. But yeah, so when we're faced with like this new thing that we've never done before, it can feel really scary, and we go back.
Well, I was just, and we talked on Wednesday night too about, and if we, transfer this to our thoughts, our thinking, or wanting to change, we have these neural pathways, right? And so it's so, to go back to what we know, those old ruts, and they're just so deep, and it's comfortable even though it's uncomfortable at the same time. So learning to do new things in new ways is uncomfortable, and we do need support, in that way. So
Yes.
it's bringing the change. So going into the void, saying, okay, I'm letting go of this. Now, what do you replace it with? And I think that that's really important, is what do we replace it with? Because nature hates a void, right? Mm-hmm. And if we don't replace it with something that the new thing, then we will just go right back.
All right. So if we go on to the next part of the story. So again, after showing the Israelites time and time again that there was more than enough, that as long as they were listening, all their needs would be met, they came to Mount Sinai. So again, we have, these people, they've been wandering, they've been doing all the things, and like I said, the Spirit's been saying, every time something comes up, Spirit says, I've got you. Here you go. Here's exactly what you need in this now moment to get you through. And they've been doing this for a very long time at this point. And then they come to Mount Sinai, and Moses is directed to go to the top of the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments. And the Israelites are told before Moses goes that if they will obey God's voice, they will be led into the promised land. So basically, before Moses leaves, he says, God is saying to you, just remember, as long as you keep listening, we're headed to the promised land. He's been with us this whole way. We've been supported. Everything we've needed has been taken care of. We're on the home stretch. We gotta, make it, keep listening, and we're gonna make it to the promised land. So Moses goes up to the mountain to have his conversation with God and get the 10 Commandments. And he's gone for 40 days. And biblically, Brummett talks about that, everything, if you know, so many of these stories, 40 days and 40 nights, 40, 40, 40. And so that he says it's a metaphysical number that indicates like 40 is the time it takes. Like that is like 40 days that's the time it takes to move through this, and so it's more of a metaphysical representation than a literal 40 days. But so Moses is gone for a while. This process of getting the 10 Commandments and being with Spirit to bring this to it takes some time. And so during that time, the Israelites start to doubt, and they start to think, what if he's disappeared on us? What if he's not coming back? Because Moses has been their direct link, right? And so they're kind of floundering without that, having him there to go to. And so they start to get desperate for spiritual leadership, and as one does, they melt down all their gold and jewelry, and they make a golden calf and begin to worship it. I've always thought that was like an interesting thing that
Doesn't look much like a calf. Looks like a full-blown cow.
yes, but
That's a lot of jewelry.
it is.
Yeah.
All the things that they were carting around in the desert with them, yes. They melt it down and they make a golden calf and they begin to worship that. Because they're trying to find something, like they're clinging to feeling connected, some kind of ritual, something, because
Tangible.
they don't feel connected to Moses in that moment. Remember that Moses is our metaphysical I am. So they start to feel disconnected, and so they do this really strange thing where they create this golden calf and they start to worship it. And Moses comes back down and he is enraged. He says, what is going on? Like, I wasn't gone that long. I told you before I left. Like, we're headed toward the promised land. Like, I don't understand. What has happened here? You know, I'm sure that's exactly how Moses said it. And so he breaks the tablets, and a lot of things that we're speeding through the story. But so eventually the people repent. And they say, I know, we don't know what happened. We just got nervous. We got filled with doubt. But we know, we understand, we need to be listening. And so Moses returns to the mountain. He gets new stone tablets. And then when he comes back, the people assist in constructing the Holy Tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant according to the direction that was given to Moses by God. And it's at that point that the people became transformed from a tribe of wandering nomads into a nation with an identity. And so Burnett talks about this again as the void experience. So the people, like, they walk into the void, they're not feeling connected with Moses or the I am. And so they start to experience doubt, fear, regression, all of those things while sitting in the void. And he says that's just an indication that we're not yet ready for transformation. So like there's a struggle happening between our new consciousness and the old consciousness. I can really relate to that. Have you ever been sitting in those moments where and I've talked about this before, like especially after coming to Unity and doing some of the work, I distinctly had moments where like something would happen and my body wanted to respond in a way, like I could feel, but I was in a different space, head and heart wise, and so it was like, why? Like I feel like my body wants to be angry about this, but like my thoughts are really okay. Like I'm really, and it was this struggle where it felt like kind of a war inside my body until I could get to a different place. I mean, it still happens sometimes. Or you have those old stinking thinking thoughts that creep in really strange moments, and you go, what? I haven't heard from you in a while. Like, where did that come from, and why is that coming up right now? And it's usually because we're in some kind of a void experience with something. And like you said, nature doesn't like a void. And so our consciousness starts to try to fill in with that old junk sometimes. And so it depends on how connected we are with that I am, or how quickly we can get back.
Yeah.
We can find our Moses
Yes.
and get back in tune. That determines how quickly we move past that. And so he says, and one day we might be filled with faith and possibility, and the next day we find ourselves worshiping a golden calf, which is the mind regressing into a self-defeating thinking.
That's happening to me right now, because I want to know what the hell they did with it. The golden calf.
I'm going to tell you.
What did they do with it after Moses said, forget it, guys?
I'm going to tell you in just a second, because that's interesting also.
So my brain is stuck on
I know, I always love these biblical stories where I'm like, okay, interesting way of dealing with that.
I think sometimes, though, we have to experience the frustration, all of the negative things to really realize how blessed we are when we turn that over and come to a place of peace. Then we really understand what peace is, because we've had the struggle.
Right, and that's the letting go of what we are not.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good point.
I still want to know, though.
Here we go. So, he says this is a time when we may find ourselves saying, I thought I'd worked through this one, right? Like, I thought I had this lesson, and then here it is again.
I've learned never to say that.
Yeah, and so what happened in the Exodus story with the golden calf is Moses melted down the golden calf, and then he ground it into powder, and then he mixed it with water, and he asked everybody to drink it.
Ooh.
And so Gromit says that this was a metaphysical way of illustrating that the old has to be released, but we must learn the experience before we can completely let it go. So it can't be released until we melt it down, grind it up, consume it into our consciousness, and allow it to be transmuted and assimilated through awareness, acceptance, and forgiveness. So
Awareness, acceptance.
yeah, so that's what they did with the golden calf. They melted it down, ground it up, and drank it.
Drink it.
It's rough going down.
Yeah.
Melt it down and suck it up.
Yeah.
Suck it up.
That's gold then. They're drinking gold.
Well, they milked it for all it was worth.
That was bad.
It's Father's Day, it's Valentine's Day.
We will allow it, Paul. We will allow that dad joke.
Actually, it was pretty good.
Don't support it, Susan.
And so he says, this is where we remind ourselves that what appears to be regression is a normal part of the process.
Yeah.
Like, it just is. We don't have to view it as bad or wrong or any of those things. It is part of the process, and it's going to happen to us. It's going to happen to others. It's just part of the process. And he says eventually we will regain our conscious connection to spirit within, and we will be guided every step of the way. And so it's really, the work we do is not to avoid the void.
Right.
It's to know that when we're in the void, that we have a faster remembrance, maybe, that, oh yeah, I am connected to eternal oneness, and I will be guided through this, and so I don't have to, maybe there's, the time it takes is, that 40 years is a little shorter for you than the 40 years for someone else, maybe.
And that's where that spiritual practice comes in. I think about going to Al-Anon meetings, and we say the same things every time, every meeting you go to, every time. You have the same quotes that you say, you go through the same process, and because it's that bringing it back up into your forethought. You know, because somebody once said, I'm not a slow learner, I'm a fast forgetter. And so, and we are. And so it's that practice of like coming to church every Sunday is hearing that again, so that it's like, oh right, and when the more we bring it into our consciousness, the quicker we come back to center, and the quicker that we recognize, oh, this is what's happening, and I need to do something about it.
And Susan, did you have something?
So I would say that 40-year mark holds more than just a nebulous kind of thing. Because when I turned 40, I don't know how to say this nicely, my whole life blew up. It totally blew up. Everything blew up. And I'd been studying metaphysics and unity, transcendental meditation since my 20s. You know, but it took that 40-year mark and it totally blowing up for me to start really understanding. And I think a lot of us go through that thing about the same time.
Same, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine was 20, but.
You know, I was just thinking while you were talking a little bit earlier, I always wondered why in the world would anybody worship a golden calf? You know, why? Wasn't it called Baal? B-A-L? I was thinking. And while you were speaking, I was thinking, well, possibly could it be that, you know, the Jewish population that was stuck in Egypt for all those years, and they were, you know, God gave them, what was the word that they used for that one? Bland food that they had to, manna. They had to live off manna, which was something that a lot of them, you know, a lot of them appreciated that kept them alive, but a lot of them were, you know, disdainful over that fact too. And so when you think about it, you go back in time and you think about some of the gods that societies had. You know, we've had the sun god. The sun keeps us alive. It helps us grow food. You know, it sustains us. You know, and so many of these people must be thinking, oh, you know, a calf. Oh, look what a calf gives us. You know, a calf gives us, you know, protein. All that, and Moses is saying, hey, you know, let's rise above this, you know, this is spirit, you know, not, you know, just physically taking care of our bodies anyway. So that's what.
That's a really good point, Paul.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
Really.
It's promise for the future too, a calf.
That's true.
That comes from living on the farm and well, we had a new calf. It was like, oh goody, you know?
Yes. Thank you, Paul. We can allow our brains to not think that was such a weird thing all day. So,
Metaphysically, you could say that's your lower mind, or, you know, with the physical needs versus trying to get to our higher mind.
And like Paul said in the story, the manna that, you know, magically appears it appears with the dew, and so it's sustaining them, like they're able to live because it appears every day and it's just enough for what they need. And over time, they start to take it a little bit for granted, and they start to get a little like, oh, this is all there is. As we tend to do in our humanness, where when something is just there, we start to you know, think of something else. Yes, we don't appreciate it as much. And so if you know, us thinking about that metaphysically, like that makes sense, right? That same thing. And that's how, you know, even though Spirit was with them in the story the whole way, it's almost like because Spirit had their back so fully, it allowed them to take it for granted and forget for moments how amazing that was, that no matter what situation came up in that desert, Spirit provided what they needed. And so again, we move through life and sometimes Spirit is like guiding and providing and guiding and providing, everything. But as soon as we hit crisis, we go, like, what's gonna happen? What do I need to do? Instead of going, wait a minute. Like, I've just been kind of moving through and things have happened exactly how they've needed to this whole time.
And it's those everyday things, those little miracles that happen, those little things that happen to us every single day, and we just blow past them because we're busy and we don't even stop and recognize them, because with what you said, Paul, it's like when there's a celebration, you kill the fatted calf for that celebration. And so it was like all these wonderful things that were happening every day. And it's like, I get that. It's like they get scared and they want to have this celebration. They want to have something big that happens that makes them feel, okay, yeah, we're going to be okay. So yeah, that.
And to go off what you said earlier, Mary, too, is that I think there's a reason God only gave us enough for every day, because of that easy forgetting. We need to go back every day to seek Him and to recognize all those little miracles.
Nice. Yeah. So Robert gives us some practical steps while experiencing the void. So he says the quickest way through the void is to embrace each experience fully and then let it go. Because we know that which we resist will persist, and we will continue to see it. He says that, it's helpful to enter into each feeling and experience, but don't get lost in any of it. That's where we get hung up and stuck. He says avoid making major decisions or long-term commitments if possible. And, he says that's because in the void, our emotions are, they could be seen as volatile. Our perspectives are shifting, sometimes rapidly. And so if we make big, huge, long-term decisions or life-changing decisions when we're in that moment, then we may find, I love this, so we may find that the person who made those decisions is not the same person who comes out on the other side of the void and has to deal with them.
Yeah, I like that.
And so he says, if possible, just put a pause on any major decisions.
But it's still all a good thing. Even if you have to go through that.
Yes.
Just feedback.
Just some awareness of, being kind to yourself might look like not making a life-changing decision. Excuse me. He says, don't push the river, meaning don't attempt to rush your progress or force things to happen either. So it is that allowing, accept each day as it comes. Don't try to recreate the past or go back to an old way of life, because it won't work even if you try. You cannot recreate the past. He says pray and meditate for regular periods each day, and that's just bringing you closer to the guidance of Spirit, doing something, whatever that looks like for you. And, we've talked about that in many other classes, that prayer and meditation looks different for each of us. There are some people that will actually, sit in a quiet place and do a 30-minute meditation in the morning. Other people, maybe that's a meditative walk. I've heard someone talk about, hand washing their dishes and having that be a meditative, that they go into a meditation while they're doing that activity. So that can look different for every person. It doesn't have to be a traditional, like, this is what meditation and prayer looks like. It's what works for you. Whatever brings you closer to the guidance of Spirit. And then he says trust. So trust in God, Spirit, the divine. Trust your inner wisdom. And trust even when all feels hopeless. So there's our, faith the size of a mustard seed. Like, don't lose your mustard seed, like, even when things are feeling hopeless.
Amy, can I?
Yeah.
I've done a gazillion talks, so a long time ago, I came up with an acronym for TRUST that is totally rely upon spirits. Ta-da!
I love that.
Okay.
I love that. He also says, take care of yourself physically. So the void can be a stressful time. And so if we're eating regularly, eating healthy foods for our body, moving our body in some form of exercise, staying hydrated, getting plenty of rest, like those are just ways, it's just, if we're taking care of our physical body, it allows us to then take care of our spiritual self. Because if we are bogged down, kind of like the Israelites, if we're bogged down and, there's not enough food, what are we going to do? Then we get farther away from that connection. So he says that's just something we can always do to help ourselves stay connected. He says pay attention to your dreams. He feels like this is often a time of vivid or unusual dreams, and so he suggests keeping a dream journal, and it might result in some interesting insight. He talks about keeping a daily journal where you're recording thoughts, feeling, insights, and experiences. Making sure that you develop a support system. And he talks about, identifying someone that you feel safe to share your experiences with, and making sure that it is a person or group or whatever that is, that you can fully be authentic without fear. So it could be a friend, it could be family, it could be a counselor, it could be an organized support group, but not isolating often helps move through the void. And then he talks about creating a type of ritual to symbolize your passage from the old life to the new, and that could be something you do alone or with a trusted friend or group. He just encourages people to express their feelings creatively. So whatever that looks like and whatever is meaningful to you is all good, no matter what other people think about it. And so it says only share it with trusted people so that they honor it with you, or do it alone so that you don't have to worry about the influence of others. So wanted to share the excerpt. There's an excerpt from The Dynamic Power of Prayer that was published in Unity magazine. And LB referenced this in our first class. So at the turn of the century, British naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace wrote about a lesson he learned by observing cocoons in which moths were developing. He noted one of the larger moths was breathing desperately with its underdeveloped wings, trying to break out of the cocoon. After several hours, he could no longer bear to watch the struggle, and so he took a sharp knife and gently split the cocoon, freeing the moth from its struggle. However, in the ensuing days, he discovered the moth was not developing naturally. Missing were the beautiful tints and shades of color which should have come into its wings. Also, the wings were stunted and they remained underdeveloped. In a few days, the moth died, long before its time. Wallace learned that the struggle against the cocoon, which he had interrupted, was nature's way of strengthening and developing the moth's wings. And so this story is a reminder that you know, much of the time we try to avoid this stage in our transition. And we do what, Paul?
What a great analogy.
Yeah. And so we've talked about that before, you know, like it gets uncomfortable, it gets vulnerable, it gets yucky, and and sometimes we stay in old patterns because we can see like the void looming on the horizon if we make a choice to leave that old pattern. And so we stay in things far longer than we should maybe. And he says, you know, so we try to move through it too quickly, or we try to avoid it altogether. But the only way to experience and move through the void is to be in it as long as it takes. So that 40-year experience, and that it's the natural process to visit the void and move through it. And just as it's not healthy to force our way through faster, we need to be mindful not to set up camp there either. So he says, either way, very little will change, and our transformation will be hindered if we either bulldoze through or we set up camp and decide to live there. Yeah, Mary.
So Brene Brown talks about, you know, she talks about vulnerability, and she says there is never any creativity or movement without vulnerability.
Right.
And she said, you know, she has talked to Navy SEALs and star athletes, and she says, name one time when someone has done something amazing or something creative, or you have moved forward in your growth, that you were not vulnerable. And never, ever. She said she had two Navy SEALs come up and go, we're going to think about this, because I know there has to be something, and we're going to think about it, and then we're going to let you know. But never, ever is there a time where you're not vulnerable in moving forward in your growth.
Yeah. Well, and you know, we've got the graphic again of the butterfly coming out of the cocoon, and I know Sue's talked about this a lot too, but like, so this first stage, like, that doesn't look like a beautiful butterfly, right? Like the wings are all crinkled and drawn up, but then as the butterfly allows time, the wings start to lengthen, the colors come in more fully, it pauses and rests and gives the wings time to strengthen, and then it's ready to fly. And it reminds me of something that I say to my staff all the time. When we're facing kind of a difficult situation, I always say, it might not look pretty, but we're going to get through it together. Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of it might not look pretty, like at first, but we're going to allow ourselves to be in whatever we need to be in to move through. And so those times, I just think that's a good reminder that when we're trusting this process of change and moving through the void, we might feel like it doesn't look pretty, like it doesn't, but if we know that those moments of allowing things to look a little messy are leading to the beauty that is waiting on the other side, that's helpful and hopeful.
And allowing other people grace, recognizing that when things are messy, when they're being messy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because I was saying that same thing, Mary, and recognizing we want to, you know, rescue people, we want to get in there and fix things for people, but we have to recognize they need that struggle as well.
Yes.
And we are there just to support them.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
How many cocoons have you sliced open for people and then realized, ooh, maybe I should have let them have their own experience.
You're making me wonder about the worm I saved off the concrete this morning.
That was a good thing.
All right, so that is our discussion on the void. Next week we're going to conclude the series in talking about new beginnings. Yay. So that will be fun. Do we have announcements? Thank you. All right, so So our 90th celebration of Unity's presence here in Springfield is next Saturday, June 24th. So that is from 4 to 7. There will be a picnic with live music, games, activities for kids. We are providing hot dogs and hamburgers, condiments and chips. If you want to bring a side dish or a dessert, that would be welcomed. And some lawn chairs, so that we don't have to haul chairs outside. And if you're going to bring something, if you could sign up and tell us what you'll bring, that will be great. There will be a 50-50 raffle. You can buy tickets in the foyer, and that drawing is going to be held at the close of the party. And then big Denise Rosier will be here at 7 p.m. To do a concert. Those tickets are only $15, and she is amazing. Please come to her concert. I would love to see the sanctuary full for her. And then next Sunday at 9:15, we're going to continue this. We're going to conclude our discussion on trusting the process of change. Due to the holiday, the board meeting is going to be on Tuesday, June 20th. Our meetings are always open and guests may arrive about 6:20. Applications for Director of the Teen Ministry will be accepted through next Sunday the 25th, CD Richardson, for a job description. And then the July Friendship Sunday on July 2nd will be an ice cream social in lieu of a potluck. Fun.
So no food?
No
Ice cream.
Ice cream social.
My birthday.
Spirit Explorers for age 4 to 11 will be held July 10th through the 13th, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. There will be a program for the congregation on Friday the 14th at 6:30. Volunteers will be needed and there will be a sign-up sheet available. And then tonight, Unity is partnering to co-host Diversity Drag Bingo featuring Ruby Diamond at the Hour House, which is on South Avenue, 326 South Avenue. It starts at 5 o'clock. There is no cover charge, but if you want to play bingo, $10 gets you 10 cards.
And the prizes are supposed to be fabulous.
Yes, and there are some prizes. Bobby he was posting pictures yesterday of some really awesome things that people would want to win. So come out and join us for that as well. And we are complete.
Thank you.